fellow law nerds. Welcome to another episode of Boom Lawyered, a Rewire News Group podcast hosted by the legal journalism team that is flying solo this episode. I'm Rewire News Group's co-chief content officer, Jess Pieklo. Imani Gandhi, Rewire News Group's other co-chief content officer, is taking a much-deserved week off from the podcast. Rewire News Group is the one and only home for expert Repro journalism that inspires you to call the senators and tell them not to take a deal because this is ridiculous. And the Boom Lawyered podcast is part of that mission. A big thanks to our subscribers and welcome to our new listeners and viewers. I am thrilled to introduce my guest for this week's episode. Skye Perryman is the president and CEO of Democracy Forward, a nonpartisan national legal organization that advances democracy and social progress through litigation, policy, public education, and regulatory engagement. Ms. Perryman took the helm at Democracy Forward a few months after January 6, 2021, in the midst of rising extremism in communities and courts across the country. She previously served as Chief Legal Officer and General Counsel of the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. There, she oversaw legal and policy strategies that resulted in historic advancements in access to healthcare for women, including developing strategies to support the extension of postpartum Medicaid coverage for more than 500,000 people, overseeing litigation that enabled the distribution of mifepristone via U.S. mail for the first time in U.S. history, launching an industry-wide effort to promote racial equity in medicine, and leading comprehensive legal and policy responses to the COVID-19 pandemic. This is one busy woman. Democracy Forward is currently challenging the Trump administration's attempt to cut off SNAP funding, the unlawful firings of federal workers, Trump trying to pay himself restitution, so money damages, as a result of the federal cases brought against him by the Department of Justice. And last, but certainly not least, they are looking into whatever is happening with the destruction of the East Wing of the White House. So a big, warm Boom Lawyered welcome to Skye Perryman.
So good to be here.
Thank you so much for taking time out of a very, very busy schedule with a lot of urgencies. So let's get right to it. I'm going to start with kind of a setup question before we get into some of the actual challenges. But, how do you and the other lawyers at Democracy Forward decide which challenges to bring? This is an administration that's stepping out of line constantly. How do you pick and choose?
We do a lot of listening to the American people, but let me take a step back and say, this is an administration that is stepping out of line, and worse than that, harming people almost by the minute. Every day there is a new thing. And it's really important that people and communities be able to access the courts and to challenge those things when it harms them. And so you will see us in big cases like the ones we're going to talk about today, where we are working on behalf of 42 million people who need their SNAP benefits. And you will see us in other cases that you might think, this is a little bit of a smaller case. But what they all have in common is the need to require that this administration account publicly and in the court of law for what they are doing to people, and then the need, of course, to win those court orders to hopefully deter their conduct in the future. So we listen to a lot of folks about what is harming them the most, but we're also looking at that autocratic playbook that we know exists, that is rapidly unfolding. And it is why you see us file a high volume of cases across a range of issues, because we do believe that there's not one special priority strategic plan case when you're talking about autocracy. You really need coverage on all fronts, and we and our colleague organizations have been really committed to that.
You really have. It is no small feat, the number of challenges that your organization has been a part of within the first year of this administration. It is really something. I want to talk about the SNAP case for a moment, because I know that is one of the challenges that is most front of mind for our audience, and a lot of action going on. So Democracy Forward has challenged the administration on its unlawful withholding of SNAP funds, and SNAP stands for Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. Right. And we are recording this conversation on Monday afternoon, November 10th. Things are moving quickly in this case. Can you give our audience a brief update and overview of where that litigation stands, knowing that this episode releases on Thursday, so we could have updates in between then?
Completely. Well, let me start by saying every court that has looked at what the Trump administration has done with respect to SNAP benefits, which is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, has said that what they have done is unlawful. So I will just start with that. So we have won multiple court orders that are requiring the administration to make payments. SNAP is the type of program that Congress created and understood that it was so essential that even in a shutdown, funds have to be paid to fund it. And so there's a specific contingency fund that the administration was withholding and not using for the SNAP payments that it is required to use. And there is other money that the administration has that we believe that it is also required to spend in this moment to ensure full payment of SNAP benefits. The court has agreed with us. The government has tried to put the brakes on the court order. It has been incredibly callous to watch what the government has done. We will literally win a court order and then they go try to appeal it to keep 42 million people from being able to access SNAP benefits. I mean, I think that's what we need to be focusing on in the country is that we have a president that is actively working to keep people from SNAP. At first they said, well, we don't know if we have the legal authority. The courts have been clear. Not only is there a legal authority, there's a legal obligation. So where we are right now is that the president and the administration rushed up to the Supreme Court. Over the weekend, Justice Jackson issued what we call an administrative stay. And she did that, according to many commentators that have looked at this, because the First Circuit, which is the appeals court that really should be hearing this, had not had time to consider it. And the Department of Justice, as it always does, was just trying to run up to the Supreme Court. So she's trying to impose some process and order. The First Circuit last night at midnight issued an order making clear that the administration needed to pay the benefits, that the court did not abuse its discretion in enforcing its court order. And now the administration today, on Monday, November 10th, and we know this will air a little later, has said that it's going to go back to the Supreme Court. And so we're waiting to get their paper in about 20 minutes. We will file a paper in the morning in response to that. And I have to say, we have a lot of confidence in this case. We have confidence in the court orders we won. We have confidence in the administration's violations of those court orders, which has caused the courts to have to double down on those orders. And we are going to continue to work night and day until all people get their benefits.
Why do you think this administration is so quick to run to the Supreme Court whenever it feels like it from this perspective?
So, we know that this is part of their strategy is to try to undermine the courts across the country and instead run up to the Supreme Court. Their strategy is actually running into some hitches. It doesn't always seem that way, but they actually can't take the majority of the cases that are being filed against them. They're not able to take those to the Supreme Court, and we're able to have those wins in place. And now the American public is really starting to respond to say, Supreme Court, why are you issuing these orders without any explanation at all? And you see the justices pushing on that. And so we're going to see what happens in this case. But the administration truly has asked the Supreme Court to weigh in on its emergency shadow docket exponentially more than it even did in the first administration. And that was like an exponential out of norm amount. But the American people are pretty wise to this now. You're seeing that reflected in the polling and the elections. And I think the court also, as a docket management matter, cannot just entertain all of these challenges. And so we'll have to see what happens.
I want to take a little of a broader view now. Are you and your colleagues seeing any themes emerging in litigation against the Trump administration this time around that's different than the first Trump administration? And if so, what are they?
The administration's disregard for court orders has been something that I'm not saying that we never saw it before, but we're certainly seeing it in more cases now. The good news of that story is that our team and the lawyers at other organizations that we work with has gotten quite good at being able to use the courts to enforce those court orders. So just because the administration might seek to ignore them, we're able to go into court, get follow-up orders, and the administration often complies in the face of that pressure. So I will say that it's requiring more resources. It's not normal. We need to be able to say this is a trend, but I do want your listeners to know we are committed to getting these orders enforced. The sloppiness of the filings that we see in many cases is different than the first Trump administration when there were more career employees at the Department of Justice, more career lawyers who had represented the government before Democratic administrations, Republican administrations. They felt that they could be there consistent with their ethics and to do that work. We've seen a big departure. I think the recent estimates are over half of the federal programs branch of the Department of Justice has left. And so you're seeing some sloppiness in cases that we hadn't seen before. The other thing I would factor in is the administration is, I think, very vulnerable on the way it has been handling the First Amendment. It's been violating the First Amendment in many different ways. We saw that in the first
Mhm.
administration, but we see that more now. So we see those arguments winning. And then, of course, there are times at which this administration is much more emboldened by the Congress and the balance of power that we're seeing in Congress with the president's allies being in those seats. But largely, those are some of the trends that are a bit different than the last time.
How do you and your colleagues balance litigation and impact strategy against the reality that the conservatives have captured a large part of the federal judiciary?
One is we are winning right now before judges that Republicans have appointed, before judges that Democrats have appointed, and before judges that President Trump himself have appointed. So I think that, we know that there unfortunately can be politics at times in the judicial system, and the far right movement has sought to double down on that reality, of course. But we're seeing the district court judges, and to a large extent, many of the appellate court judges really try to call it like they see it on the law and are prevailing in so many of these cases, including before judges that the president himself appointed. The other thing I would say is that the federal judiciary, outside of the Supreme Court, has been shaped by a diversity of administrations. And so you have pro democracy judges across the federal court system. The judicial balance looked better on the first day of this administration, certainly than it did on the first day of the Biden administration and the first day of the
Yeah.
last Trump administration. And so I think that it's a much more complex situation, which is, of course, why the president is seeking to undermine these lower courts and run to the Supreme Court, where I do think that he will run into more trouble than he has so far. So,
I really appreciate that answer because we don't often think about the impact that the Biden judicial nominations had on the incoming second Trump administration. And I think, too, even with the Reagan appointee who recently stepped down so that
Judge
they could.
Wolf, yes,
Yes,
yeah.
that even very conservative judges have seen a bridge too far in this administration on many of their actions, and that for institutionalists should be a place of hope and good feeling.
And like I said, we are winning before some of the judges that President Trump himself appointed on issues like civil rights, the blocking of the Department of Ed Dear Colleague letter. I mean, these are on issues that are not necessarily always the issues that you would expect judges to align on, but the way in which the administration is operating is so clearly unlawful. Really, we are the party that has to prevail on the court order.
So, we've touched on a whole variety of issues and cases that you and your organization is involved in. You give us a quick rundown of the timeline in the SNAP case. What are you doing to find joy in all of this, to catch your breath, to have a moment? Please tell me that you are.
I'll just say for my colleagues at Democracy Forward, all of us, we are a team that really prioritizes community and connection and trying to support each other and getting those moments, whether that's personally or with the team here. So I'm so glad you asked that question. We do find a lot of joy in our work and in the clients that we get to represent. The SNAP case is a great example. We're representing the Rhode Island Council of Churches and Workers and food banks and small businesses. And so I will say that it is a privilege and a joy to get to do this work. We are the happy warriors, I think, in a lot of ways, people have called us. But more personally, I have a 10-year-old son, a newly 10-year-old son. He just had a birthday. And we take some time out on the weekends, especially to try to do some baking or walking, going to sports games, those types of things give me great joy. And then I'm a big fan of the arts. And so, whether it is just trying to see a half of an exhibit or take some time out to read some poetry or go to a concert, those things can really reset you in a great way, as can being in nature, which we've really tried to do. DC, where I live, is close to the Shenandoah Mountains and the Shenandoah Valley, and we go out there a lot on the weekends.
Good. I know that I speak for all of the Boom Lawyered family when I say that it is important for you happy warriors to be taking care of yourselves because we need you all to be your best selves with everything going on. So, on that note, do you have any advice for our audience in getting through the onslaught of bad and disorienting news from the administration? As you said, it feels like every day it's a new thing.
I have several things. I mean, one, I think we do want people to make a plan about how they're getting their information. I think that can be very helpful just as a practical matter. If you are a person that wakes up and thrives from getting all of the bombarded with everything, some people do thrive on that with social media. All the best to you.
Uh-huh.
But if you're someone for whom that is overwhelming, making a plan about the sources that you want to read, the time you want to take out in your week or your day to stay informed without allowing that to just completely take over, I think is really important. But more important than that, what we know about autocratic actors is that their number one tool that they use, it's not voter suppression, it's not gerrymandering, it's not even the military on the streets or all these things this administration has tried. It's actually a strategy to make people believe that they don't have power and that they don't have the power to change their circumstances. And the way we address that is to be in community with each other, to build connections with each other, to engage together in actions, small actions in our local communities that we can take that do make a big difference in the lives of people. And so we're spending a lot of time at Democracy Forward, really encouraging communities to be building. We started a Dinners for Democracy and Coffee for Change program to try to encourage folks to just not give in to the isolation and the hopelessness. Get together with some folks. Let's build some tents together. And that's really what we're focusing on.
I love that. The need for community right now is acute, and hearing advocacy organizations really center that in their work is so powerful and important.
The thing I worry about most, people ask me, it's not, does the president follow a Supreme Court order? It's not, what do the military generals do? I worry about all those things. But what I worry about is that people will give up and that
Mm.
they will become convinced that they have no power. And we can't do that. And so that's really the number one ask we have of folks that are trying to manage this moment is to do whatever it takes. Find your joy, get in your community, build some community, create some connection, defy isolation. And that is what's going to help us get to the next.
Skye Perryman, thank you so much for especially ending on such an uplifting and inspirational note. If our audience wants to find out more about Democracy Forward, support your work, where can they get that information?
We are on every social media channel, so please find us and follow us. And then go to our website at democracy4.org. Sign up for our newsletter. We do not spam you. That is my promise. We do not spam you. You're not going to be asked every single day to rush $5. I promise you. But what we will do is we will send you a newsletter. We will send you some urgent updates at times on our cases. And those resources will have ways that you can become engaged.
Thank you so much for your time and for all of your efforts on behalf of the American people. You're a superstar.
Thank you.
This is a big moment for history. Next year is America's 250th birthday, and well, look around. There's a lot of history being made. We just touched on one little bit of it in this conversation with Skye Perryman and Democracy Forward. If you like content like that, shows that put current events into a larger perspective, then subscribe to This Day for your historical perspective, wherever you get your podcasts, as well as YouTube and Instagram. Well, that was a phenomenal conversation with Skye Perryman. And here's what we have on deck at Boom Lawyered. We have a Boom Lawyered AMA, an Ask Me Anything, except it's both Imani and I, so it should be an Ask Us Anything. But anyway, it's an AMA. You have a question for me and Imani? Send it our way via Blue Sky, and we'll do our best to answer it. We can't give legal advice, but we can explain some of the legal nonsense in the news right now. Or I guess you could ask about our dogs or what dishes we're currently cooking, what albums we're listening to. It's an AMA, so ask away. We are also keeping an eye on the abortion adjacent cases being argued at the Supreme Court in December. We'll have more on those after arguments. Thanks again to Skye Perryman of Democracy Forward for joining us. Be sure to follow Rewire News Group on all of your social platforms, and we will see you on the tubes, folks.
This is Boom Lawyered, a Rewire News Group podcast produced and engineered by Chapter 4 and available on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcasts.